In sports cards, is there a difference between organic scarcity or manufactured scarcity? Dealer, collector, and investor debate that next. Welcome back to Dealer, Collector, and Investor Debate. I'm Theo, and welcome back to For Collectors, a channel that's for collectors like you. And on today's episode, it is a good old-fashioned debate about the organic scarcity of certain sports cards versus the manufactured scarcity of certain sports cards. This all came about after Mr. Wonderful bought that big card and they broke the record for the highest selling sports card of all time. And, there was a lot of, speculation out there of, was it a legit sale? And, that's a totally different debate right now. What I want to talk about today was something that Leighton Sheldon actually brought up. And I thought it was very, very interesting. He was very concerned that the highest selling card was a manufacturer scarcity type of a card. He didn't think that that was a great thing. He didn't, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he just thought it wasn't the best thing ever that trumped an organically scarce card like a Honus Wagner, for example, is a great example, right? And it's a really interesting thing to think through, though, because when it comes to the manufactured scarce cards, essentially what we're saying is Topps or Fanatics could just design a card and they know that card is going to be the best selling card of all time if they have the right formula, right? They have the right goats on the card, and they have NBA patches or NFL patches, and now that they're seeing which of these are selling for the most, as long as they can get the right formula, it seems like you could possibly produce another card to just break the record, right? So that's where this whole conversation for me starts. And I do want to say, I think the vintage hobby, and granted, I know we're all one hobby, I get it, but I do see there's certain collectors out there that focus more on vintage. I'm one of them. I focus more on vintage. 99.9% of the money I spend in the hobby is on vintage cards. So you could look at it however you want to look at it. But a lot of the guys who spend a majority of their money in vintage, they turn their noses for the manufactured scarce things. As I just explained, kind of like Leighton said, could you produce $1 million card if you know the right formula, right? And I do think there's some that can be a little bit unfair, though. You know what I mean? Like the modern hobby and the collectors who are collecting, the modern players, they want scarce cards just like we want scarce cards, right? So how does Topps and Fanatics go about that process, right? If you feel there's a difference between the two, right? And I will tell you, I had debates on both sides of the table here with this group. I will show this card here. It's my 1968 Bazooka box. If you've watched my channel, you've seen it a bunch of times. But there's like, I want to say, off the top of my head, there's like less than 20 of these boxes that have survived, right? Full boxes. Now, this was bubblegum. These were heavily produced. It's just what kid was saving the full box, right? There's probably something, a product today, you throw away the box, it could be worth something in 30 years. You just you wouldn't know as a kid, right? Or you might have cut off the cards. So this to me is a great example of something in my collection that just became organically scarce. People didn't realize it was going to be worth something one day. A lot of kids probably didn't realize a baseball card that was in a cigarette pack wasn't going to be worth much one day, right? So that's where we kind of start the brain exercise of this became organic on its own, and we want that instant gratification of having scarce cards today immediately instead of waiting 50 years to have that card become scarce, right? So I think it's a fun debate. I think it's a fun conversation to have. And I really hope that more people in the community have the conversation. Without further ado, let's get to the panel and let's listen to their answers next.
So I disagree with the statement that there is no difference between organic scarcity and manufactured scarcity. And if you look at the very definition of those words, it implies a difference. And I think the way that we see these two concepts play out in our hobby further supports that difference. So for starters, when I think of organic scarcity, I think of items that were preserved when preservation of those items was not the expected norm. And a couple of examples I can think of would be like maybe a mint condition coin from 200 years ago, or a early pre-war or vintage trading card where there just aren't a lot of them out there anymore. And with those two examples, you can kind of see how I would classify them as organic scarcity. So in the case of a mint coin that's 200 years old, those coins were not created back then to be collected and protected. They were created to be used as currency in the real world. So a lot of them were exchanged between people back and forth, rubbed up against other coins in people's pockets and cash registers, were dropped on the sidewalk and suffered all kinds of condition issues. Maybe others were melted down for their precious metals over the years during world conflicts or things like that. And so out of the original batch of those that were created, only a very small amount of them survived or survived in the condition that would make them a scarce collectible. So that's organic scarcity to me. And in our hobby, sports cards, I feel the same way. Like say a pre-war card or a very scarce vintage card, many of them were not created with the idea that they would become collectibles. They were advertising pieces to come along with your tobacco, or in the case of maybe Topps bubblegum cards from the 50s, almost toys that kids would get with their stick of gum, to play corners with or stick them in their bike spokes. And their primary purpose or their intended purpose wasn't to be highly valued collectibles. And so because of that, many of them were lost to time or destroyed. Topps infamously in 1952 dumped, containers worth of their high-numbered series into the ocean because they just weren't selling. So they created some organic scarcity there. So that's how I view organic scarcity. But the reason I think manufactured scarcity is different, and the way I would define it, I think manufactured scarcity came about to fill the void that was left behind when the concept of organic scarcity kind of died on the vine. And basically, I think what happened is when sports cards became known or acknowledged as collectibles, however many decades back you want to date that to, 70s, 80s, certainly by the 90s, there was a concept that they had some value and that they were going to be collected and they were going to be protected. And the norm for those items at that point became protecting and collecting them. And once that transition happens, I think organic scarcity goes away at that point. But I think scarcity is important to the hobby. We don't all want to collect the exact same things. We like there to be a challenge element in our hobby. We like to have something that differentiates our collection from the millions of other collections out there. And scarcity fills that void. So what is the hobby to do once it becomes acknowledged widespread as a collectibles hobby and the concept of organic scarcity goes away? They developed manufactured scarcity to take its place. And sometimes it really bothers me when people kind of criticize manufactured scarcity or artificial scarcity. And I hear this sometimes, maybe not as much anymore, from people who only collect vintage, and they sort of look down on cards that are manufactured scarcity. And in my definition, that's cards that were produced with a purposeful intent to be scarce. Think of modern parallels or one-of-ones or items that were printed in small quantities by design in order to make them scarce. And my counter argument to them is we need that in the hobby. My counter argument to that criticism, rather, is we need that in the hobby. We want scarcity in our hobby. And I think all of us, whether we collect vintage or modern or both, would like to see our hobby continue on into the future and new generations of people join the hobby. And so, in my opinion, we need that scarcity, and manufactured scarcity filled that void. I think about what the hobby would look like in the absence of manufactured scarcity, and I really don't like how it looks in my head. Are we all supposed to just collect the same 700 Topps cards that come out every year? Go to our local big box store after the baseball season winds down, buy a factory set, and then stick it on the shelf and go sit on our thumbs for 12 months or find a new hobby until next year's set rolls around? I don't think we want that. Is Topps supposed to take 80% of next year's Series 2 flagship set and go dump it in the ocean in order to create, I guess, organic scarcity. I don't like that. And I don't even think that would be organic scarcity. I think that would be manufactured because they're purposely dumping those cards in the ocean at this point, even though they're known collectibles. So I don't think we can escape manufactured scarcity unless we want the hobby to kind of die out. And I would hate to see that. So yeah, that's my answer. I absolutely see a difference between organic scarcity and manufactured scarcity, but I think both are good for the hobby. Both are necessary for the hobby. And as a collector, I love them both.
Okay, on this one, I'm going to agree with the statement that there's no difference between organic and manufactured rarity and scarcity in cards. When it comes to the question of can they both be collectible, investable, I see, like, for example, if you have a card that there's 20 known examples of still around that we're calling organic scarcity and rarity, and then there's a card that was numbered to 20 by Topps, for example, I consider those both equally as rare. There's also grading rarity. So the Ricky Henderson rookie card, 1980 Topps, they made a lot of those, but there's only like 20 something that have ever graded a PSA 10. So that's a rare card in a certain grade. I consider these all to be rare, but there's a huge difference in the story of how those cards became rare. So I'm going to say the coolness factor for me personally, a card that is old and has survived the test of time, and there's only been 20 that have ever survived. And when that card came out, there was no thought that it would ever be collected in the future or worth anything in the future. I like that story the most. And then below that, the story of, hey, Topps only produced 20 of this card. And then way below that, there's only been 20 graded a PSA 10. So that's how I rank the coolness factor. That's what I'm going to call it. I do want to say a couple other quick thoughts on this. You know, so as I just said, I'm not in the camp. I've heard people say manufactured rarity is not rarity. I disagree with that. I also want to say perhaps the most famous card of all, the T206 Wagner. That's an old card, but it's really manufactured rarity, right? The tobacco companies, they only produced a certain amount of those, I guess less than 100. And you can look up that whole story, but that was manufactured. So are we saying that's not a rare card? I don't think so. Also, there's a couple pitfalls that you got to look out for with each type of rare card. One being that first type where, you know, there was, let's say, a bunch produced, but it's old, so only a certain amount have ever survived. Hey, there's those attic finds and basement finds and barn finds all the time still. So there's still no guarantee that there's not more than, let's say, 20 of that card we're thinking of out there that they might discover in the future. Obviously, that the chance of that becomes less and less over time, but there's still that chance because those cards weren't serial numbered. So we really don't know how many were made in certain cases. We just know how many we know of. And then obviously with the manufactured, we're calling it rare cards that are, let's say, a gold serial numbered to 10 or whatever it might be. Yes, that's a rare card, but the manufacturers can continue making those gold cards in different products in different years to dilute it won't make that card any less technically rare, but if there's a lot of that same type of card made that's numbered to 10, it can dilute, I think, the collectability and even the investability in certain cards. And then obviously with the grading thing, you know, just because there's only 20 graded a PSA 10 of a certain card right now, we don't know what the future holds with PSA or any grading company. They might loosen standards in the future. Who knows? So that's definitely, you know, a pitfall potential. If you think you might have a rare card in a certain grade, there's no guarantee on the future of that.
That's a strong disagree from me. I think there's a very, very clear difference. You know, organic scarcity or natural scarcity, whatever you want to call it, I think generally would refer to like items from long ago that are just very rare, have become very rare naturally. Maybe they didn't produce many of them back then because there was no demand, or many of them just gotten destroyed over the years, and so they're naturally very rare. That's very different than like the scarcity of a card today, like a 101, where a company has decided, hey, let's make this card rare, and probably a group of people have in a room have said, okay, let's make a rare card and only make 10 of them, or only make one of them, or only make 5 of them, or whatever it is. A conscious decision by a company to make something rare versus naturally being rare, because of the way the world has occurred over the last 100 years, I think are very two different things. And big picture, value wise, I think the organic scarcity generally holds up a lot better because it's much more natural, and most of the time you can't recreate natural or organic scarcity, whereas you can generally or often recreate something very similar for manufactured scarcity. So like an example would be a 52 Mantle or a T206 Honus Wagner. You can't recreate a Mickey Mantle rookie. There's nothing you can do to make that again today. You can't recreate a Honus Wagner playing days card. There's nothing you can do to recreate that, or even something sort of similar. But with a I don't know, a really rare 101 Shohei Ohtani auto, you can recreate that anytime you want. If you're the card manufacturers and you have enough money to pay Shohei Ohtani and to create that card, you can recreate other cards that are very, very similar. And so the manufactured scarcity often is something that there's often a lot of comparable items that are very similar, and so the scarcity is sort of the scarcity is not as impactful as if it was way back then, because if you want a card from way back then, you got to go get one of those, and there's no alternative. Whereas with a lot of modern day rare stuff, you'll have a lot of other alternatives that can basically act in the same sort of basically satisfy you in very, very similar ways.